Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony today. A lot of the talk today has focused on three buckets about which we frequently speak. In strength, or how many troops we have, readiness, how those troops are trained, ready to fight, and modernization, buying new stuff for the future, new vehicles, new aircraft. We have not yet touched on a subset of that third bucket, nuclear modernization, some of which is both nuclear and conventional, like the F-35 or the B-21, some of which is exclusively nuclear, like the ground-based strategic deterrent or the nuclear command and control system. Could we just maybe start at my left, your right, and go down the panel and get your thoughts on nuclear modernization? Mr. Archmanik.
Senator Cotton, I think the nation at this point does not have a choice but to modernize its strategic nuclear forces simply because of the block obsolescence of our major platforms and weapon systems. Nuclear weapons remain the bedrock of our security. We must have a viable deterrent. We must have a viable second strike capability so that no adversary ever could see an advantage to crossing that threshold and using nuclear weapons against us. And I think the Ohio replacement program rightly has first place in line, both because of the age of the Ohio ships and also because I personally believe that the undersea portion of our nuclear triad is the bedrock of that survivable second strike force.
Mr. Thomas.
I would just add to that and say we need to be paying closer attention to our tactical nuclear forces and the tactical nuclear balance. The most likely nuclear confrontation we are going to have is going to be a theater range tactical contingency. And this is one that I think we have largely given, we've been inattentive to over the past 25 years. For example, in Russia, in the case of Europe, we know that Russia is in violation of the INF Treaty. They're developing medium-range, both cruise and ballistic missile systems that could hold NATO military targets at risk. And I think we should question the ability of fourth-generation fighters armed with gravity bombs, B-61s, to respond in the presence of precision air defenses that would likely ring almost any militarily significant target. We need to have viable theater-range, lower-yield response options than we currently do.
Before we move on, can I follow up that? What's your best estimate on the imbalance today between Russia and NATO forces on tactical nuclear weapons?
Well, there is obviously a numerical asymmetry that favors Russia. I would say more importantly is the qualitative asymmetry, that in terms of these middle rungs on the escalatory ladder, I think Russia has the advantage, and we need symmetrical in-kind response options that we lack. We talk a lot about LRSO, and that's a viable option. There may be other systems more similar to JASSM, which allow us some low observable standoff capability with a very high probability of the weapon arriving at the target that we're going to need to consider in the years ahead.
And you mentioned Russian violations of the Intermediate Nuclear Range Forces Treaty. So if media reports are to be believed, and Russia has now not just tested but put into operational use a road mobile cruise missile of intermediate range, does that mean that the United States is the only nation on the face of the earth that has restrained itself from deploying such a missile?
I don't know if it's the only nation on the face of the earth, but if you think about the robust arsenal of intermediate range ballistic missiles that China has built up, at the IRBM capabilities of North Korea and Iran, and now Russia in flagrant violation of the INF Treaty, the United States is kind of the last party standing, and we look sort of like a chump in this class of problem. And this is an area where we need to probably be thinking about a world beyond the INF Treaty, both because that may be the world that becomes our reality, but also if we want to go back and try to reinforce the INF Treaty, we have to have some viable military backstop for any sort of negotiations. Right now, we'd be negotiating from a position of technological weakness.
Thank you. Mr. Donnelly.
I would agree, again, with what Dave and Jim have said, but Jim's point, I think, is a larger one than he suggested. That is, we have a strategy deficit when it comes to nuclear warfighting. I hate to use that terrible term. We have a world that's an increasingly a multipolar nuclear world. There was a report yesterday that the Chinese have allegedly reached parity both qualitatively and quantitatively with the U.S. Nuclear arsenal. I have no idea whether that's actually true or not, but if it's not true today, it'll be true tomorrow or pretty soon. So we think in Cold War, very tit-for-tat terms in this way, and I'm not quite sure what the new paradigm should be, but I'm pretty sure that the old one is inappropriate to the world that we're living in now.
Mr. Clark.
I would agree with the comments of all my predecessors here, particularly with regard to the tactical nuclear weapon question, because if we don't have the ability to respond to that kind of threat, it's not so much that we might have an exchange there, but it's just the fact that we're vulnerable to coercion then. You know, the Russians threaten the Baltics, we threaten to come in on their behalf, the Russians threaten a small nuclear attack, and we don't have any way to respond to that, so we're forced to back down.
Thank you.